The last thing I expected to find inside that corn maze was the person who had spent the entire summer avoiding my eyes, and the last thing I expected her to do was reach for my hand as if she had finally run out of reasons to let me go. We had entered laughing, certain we would find our way out in 10 minutes, but nearly an hour later the tall walls of corn had swallowed every familiar landmark, every shortcut, and every excuse we had been using to keep our distance. Then she stopped beneath the warm afternoon sun, looked at me with tears quietly gathering in her eyes, and took my hand. For a moment, neither of us moved. She simply held on and whispered that maybe we should stay lost. Before we begin, if you believe kindness can change a person's life, that forgiveness can heal what pride breaks, and that hope sometimes arrives when we least expect it, please like this video, leave a comment, share this story with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you can remain part of our family and our community. My name is Everett Hayes, and before that afternoon, I had always believed I was good at finding my way. I could fix a broken fence, repair an old lawn mower, navigate a highway without a map, and somehow remember every shortcut through the small town where I had grown up. What I wasn't good at was finding my way through another person's heart, especially when that person happened to be my neighbor, Marlo Bennett. Marlo had moved into the little blue house beside mine in early spring, carrying 2 cardboard boxes, a houseplant that looked half dead, and an expression that seemed permanently caught somewhere between exhaustion and determination. She was 29, worked as a children's art teacher at the elementary school, and had the kind of smile that appeared slowly, as though she wanted to make certain the world deserved it before giving it away. I noticed her immediately, though I tried very hard not to. Our friendship began with ordinary things. She borrowed a screwdriver. I helped her carry a heavy bookshelf. She left a plate of homemade cookies on my porch after I repaired a loose step. I returned the plate the next day with fresh strawberries. Sometimes we stood between our driveways talking about nothing important, watching children ride bicycles down the street or listening to the distant sound of lawnmowers. There was always something unfinished between us, some quiet feeling neither of us named. But every time I thought she might be ready to let me closer, she stepped backward. Eventually I learned why. Marlo had been engaged once. Her fiancé, Callum, had died unexpectedly in a highway accident almost 2 years before she moved to our town. She had carried the loss so quietly that most people probably assumed she had healed. But grief doesn't always look like tears. Sometimes it looks like a woman who refuses to unpack certain memories. Sometimes it looks like someone who laughs warmly with everyone except the person who might matter most. And sometimes it looks like Marlo, standing in her garden on a sunny Saturday morning, smiling at me while making absolutely certain she never stood close enough for either of us to mistake friendship for something deeper. I had my own reason for understanding that kind of distance. 3 years earlier, my younger brother, Wesley, had asked me to help him move to another city. I had been angry about something stupid, something so small I couldn't even remember the exact words anymore. I told him I was too busy. He left without me. We never had the chance to settle the argument because he died unexpectedly a few months later. Since then, I had carried the ugly knowledge that the last meaningful thing I had given my brother was rejection. It had made me cautious with people. I didn't want to love anyone enough to disappoint them. I didn't want anyone to trust me enough that I could fail them. Marlo seemed to understand that without ever knowing the whole story. Then came the Autumn Harvest Festival. The entire town gathered at a farm outside the county line, where there were hayrides, apple cider, handmade crafts, pumpkin stands, children's games, and an enormous corn maze that stretched across several acres. I almost didn't go. Crowds weren't really my thing, but that morning Marlo appeared on my porch wearing a cream-colored sweater, jeans, boots covered with a little dust, and an expression that made it impossible to say no. She had been invited by several teachers from her school, but they had cancelled at the last minute. She asked if I wanted to walk through the maze with her. I pretended to think about it longer than necessary. Inside, the maze seemed harmless at first. Sunlight poured between the tall stalks, insects buzzed lazily in the warm air, and somewhere beyond the corn we could hear children laughing. Marlowe joked about how ridiculous it was that two adults could voluntarily pay money to become confused in a field. I told her that if we got lost, I would simply follow the sun. She laughed and said that sounded exactly like something a man would say 5 minutes before admitting he had no idea where he was. For the first 20 minutes, everything felt easy. Then we reached a fork that looked familiar, turned left, and discovered that every path somehow looked exactly the same. We tried another turn. Then another. The laughter faded. The sun shifted higher in the sky, and the maze seemed to grow quieter. We could still hear the festival occasionally, but the sounds were distant and confusing. At one point, we heard someone calling from another section, but when we followed the sound, it disappeared. Marlowe tried to stay cheerful, but I noticed her fingers trembling slightly. I asked if she was all right, and she nodded too quickly. That was when I realized she wasn't afraid of the maze. She was afraid of being trapped. We kept walking until we reached a small clearing where the corn had been flattened beneath an old wooden sign. We sat there for a few minutes, drinking the last of our water. Marlowe stared at the ground and finally admitted that she hated places where she couldn't see an exit. I didn't ask why. Instead, I told her about Wesley. For the first time, I told someone the whole story. I told her about the argument, the phone call I didn't return, the guilt, and the way I had spent years believing that if I had just been kinder on one ordinary afternoon, everything would have turned out differently. Marlowe listened without interrupting. When I finished, she didn't tell me it wasn't my fault. She didn't offer some easy sentence meant to erase years of regret. She simply said that sometimes we punish ourselves because guilt feels easier than accepting that life can be cruel without asking permission. Her words stayed with me. Then she told me about Callum. She said she had loved him, but after his death, she had started believing that loving someone meant eventually losing them. So she had built a life where nobody could get close enough to break her again. She moved to a new town. She changed jobs. She stopped making long-term plans. Even the house next to mine, she admitted, had been chosen partly because she thought a quiet neighborhood would make it easier to disappear. I looked at her and realized something painful. She hadn't been avoiding me because she didn't care. She had been avoiding me because she did. We stood and continued walking. The maze grew darker only in the sense that the tall corn blocked more of the afternoon sunlight, but the day itself remained bright and warm. Eventually we reached another fork. I chose the right path, convinced it would lead us toward the entrance. It didn't. Instead, it led to a dead end. Marlowe laughed softly, but there was sadness in it. She leaned against a stalk and closed her eyes. I apologized, and she shook her head. Then she stepped closer. She told me that for years she had been waiting for life to give her a guarantee before she allowed herself to live again. She wanted certainty that nobody would leave, that nobody would die, that nobody would disappoint her, that she would never have to feel that terrible emptiness again. But standing there with me, completely lost, she realized something. There was never going to be a guarantee. She reached for my hand. Her fingers were warm and slightly trembling. She looked at me and said that maybe we should stay lost. Not forever, she explained, but long enough to stop pretending that every wrong turn was a disaster. Maybe being lost together wasn't failure. Maybe sometimes you had to stop searching for the old path before you could discover a new one. I held her hand. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about Wesley's last unanswered call. I wasn't thinking about everything that could go wrong. I wasn't trying to protect myself from tomorrow. I was simply there. With her. And somehow, that was enough. We eventually found the exit because a worker noticed we were missing and followed the maze's service path to guide us out. When we stepped into the open field, the afternoon sun felt almost impossibly bright. Marlowe didn't let go of my hand immediately. Neither did I. But outside the maze, reality returned. She had an opportunity waiting for her in another city. The children's art program she worked for had received funding for a new position, and she had secretly been considering moving away. She told me she had been afraid to mention it because she didn't know what I would say. I asked what she wanted. She admitted she didn't know anymore. That evening never came. Instead, we sat on a wooden bench beneath the afternoon sun, watching families carry pumpkins toward their cars. She told me that before meeting me, leaving had seemed like the safest choice. Now, for the first time, staying seemed worth the risk. I didn't ask her to stay for me. I told her she had to choose a life that made her happy, even if that life took her somewhere I couldn't follow. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she smiled. Not the careful smile I had seen all summer. A real one. She said she wanted to stay, but not because she was afraid of leaving. She wanted to stay because she had finally learned that staying could also be a choice made from courage. Months passed. Marlo stayed in town. She accepted a larger role at the school and started an art program for children who struggled with loss and change. I began volunteering there once a week. We didn't magically become perfect. We argued. We misunderstood each other. Sometimes one of us pulled away when things became too emotional. But now, instead of disappearing, we talked. And slowly, the walls came down. One spring afternoon, almost 6 months after the corn maze, Marlo and I returned to the same farm. The maze had been rebuilt for the new season, but this time we stood outside it, looking at the entrance. She smiled and took my hand. We walked inside again. Neither of us carried a map. We didn't need one. We knew that being lost wasn't the opposite of being found. Sometimes being lost was the beginning of finding the courage to become someone new. Sometimes the person who walks into your life isn't there to erase your past. They are there to teach you that your past doesn't have to control your future. And sometimes love doesn't arrive with grand promises or perfect timing. Sometimes it arrives quietly, wearing a cream-colored sweater, standing beside you in a field of corn, taking your hand when you are both afraid, and reminding you that you don't have to know exactly where you're going to take the next step. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. And before the story ends, I want you to leave a meaningful comment and tell us this: have you ever been afraid to take a second chance because you were scared of losing again? Sometimes sharing that feeling can remind someone else that they are not alone. Marlo and I eventually reached the center of the maze, where we found a small wooden platform overlooking the endless rows of corn. The afternoon sky stretched above us, clear and blue. She leaned against my shoulder, and I realized that I no longer wanted a life where nothing could hurt me. I wanted a life where something mattered enough to be worth the risk. She squeezed my hand. And this time, neither of us wanted to find the exit. We stayed there a little longer, not because we were lost, but because for the first time, we had finally found exactly where we belonged.